Among these deliverables are the construction of and migration to a customized state-of-the-art database system, a model program to advance college readiness, transition and retention, and a scientific evaluation of the model with the purpose of assessing the program for possible validation and replication outside the organization. 3 TSIC local programs are participating in TSIC's Flight I3 project, which encompasses 5 Florida county school districts. And we're also happy to welcome Maureen Hoyler, who's the Executive Vice President of the Council for Opportunity in Education, and who serves as the Director of the Council's I3 grant. Since 2010, the Council for Opportunity in Education has used this federal funding to develop the Gaining Options for College, Go College program, which builds on the work of TRIO talent search programs in Erie, Pennsylvania and Louisville, Kentucky by expanding the college access services available in high schools. In conjunction with this work, the Council for Opportunity in Education and VOLTA have developed the Go College data system, which provides data to schools and districts regarding student progress from high school to college completion. I want to orient you a bit to how this webinar will be laid out. It's slightly different. If you joined us for the last webinar, it's slightly different in terms of format. We're going to break into 3 segments, and we'll be answering your questions after each segment. And the way to ask the questions is to post them in the chat box, or there's also a Q&A box. We're trying to centralize it, so you can use either one, but we prefer the chat box if possible. We'll do our best to get to your questions as time allows, but we also do have an open hours on July 25th at 2 p.m. where you can follow up with questions to the presenters or to Shai or myself. And you can visit the events page on the I3 community for information about the open phone sessions. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the communications community on the I3 website in a few days, and the PowerPoint and handout are also posted in that community now. So be sure to stay to the end and complete the brief survey, the evaluation on this webinar. Your feedback is really important to us on how to improve and modify and make changes to this, so we'll make these webinars relevant and meaningful to all of the grantees. So, jumping right in on the next slide. Today we are hoping to be able to share some tools and processes that we've found to be effective in creating structures for effective internal project communications. You're going to have the opportunity to hear from me and Shai about some general principles and strategies, and then also from 2 of your fellow I3 grantees about how they've succeeded in this work on their projects. You'll also see that one of the goals is to gather your successes and questions through the online chat and through the community, the discussion forum, and through the resources section. So we'd love to have you send us any models or tools that you've used or any tricky issues that you're working out that would benefit from your colleagues providing suggestions through the discussion forum. Next slide. As I mentioned, these webinars that we're featuring were all developed as a result of the need sensing conversations you've had with our liaisons. We found that there's a lot of overlap in some of the issues raised. So as you can see, as I'm sure you probably know, communication can encompass project management, partner management, dissemination. There's a lot of overlapping strands. So we want to be sure to set your expectations that today's webinar is about planning for effective project communications that focus on those stakeholders who are integral to making your project a success. We will be featuring a webinar specifically on partner management in next month on August 14th, and then another one on dissemination, which could include marketing, branding, publishing findings, et cetera, in October. So we may touch on some of these strands, but this is specifically about effective program internal communications. So in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a bit of a communication planning proselytizer, so if you could advance the slide, Nate. I think the benefits of taking the time to do thoughtful and comprehensive communication planning at the outset of a project or at the beginning of a new project phase or at the end of a project phase are many. Effective communication planning can ensure that everyone responsible for the success of your work is operating with the same goals in mind and with a consistent understanding of why, how, when, and who is responsible. It can provide the structure for building relationships with people who you may not have worked with before or have worked with them in a different capacity. And when it comes down to it, many successful projects really just come down to the relationships you build. And so this is a way to provide structure around building those relationships. And providing clarity and transparency often allows for effective multi-directional sharing of lessons learned and successes and best practices and questions. And while planning on the front end can take some time, I found that it really saves time in the long run by building these structures that folks get used to in order to find out information. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Shai, who will talk a little bit about how to develop a communication plan, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers.
Next slide. Thank you, Rebby. So as Rebby said, I'm going to walk through the different elements that comprise what we believe is an effective internal communication plan. And specifically, we're going to be talking about how to identify the different types of audiences that you may have, again, for internal communication. What are the goals for communicating with each type of audience, the different channels or media that you might want to think about using with different audiences, how frequently to communicate with them, and also the messages that you want to transmit through your communication channels. Next slide. So the first step in developing a communication plan is really thinking through the different types of audiences that you have when thinking about all the different aspects of your project. This step involves listing all the different audiences, creating a matrix to prioritize your audiences, and then brainstorming what you know about each one and how you can help to better communicate with them. Next slide. So here on the left side of this slide, you have a list of all of stakeholders, an example of stakeholders for a specific project. This is just an example of what we suggest that you do. So in this example, you have the central project team based in Waltham, Massachusetts. Then you might have telecommuters that are part of your project team as well. You might have an advisory board, a funder, the different sites that you might be working with in different parts of the country. You might also have vendors, other types of partners, an evaluator, a contract office within your same agency. So these are the different types of audiences that you may have in your project. Once you develop this list and really think about all the different kinds of audiences, you might want to use some type of analysis or matrix like the one that we present on the right side of the screen. Here, what do we do is help you think about how to categorize your different audiences based on the influence that they have on your project, as well as the interest that you and them share in the project. So for example, in the top left cell in this matrix, you have the people who have a lot of influence in your project, but who might not be as interested in communicating frequently. Maybe a funder or an advisory board, people who are very useful to you, but you might want to not communicate as frequently. On the bottom left side, you have people who don't have much influence and who are not that interested, who have low interest in the project. So them obviously would be at the low of your priority list. Top right, maximum effort. Those are the ones who are most influential and have high interest. So maybe those are your local sites who are doing the work day to day. They're the ones you want to prioritize and make sure that you really communicate well. And then the last cell, bottom right, you have those who don't have much influence but are very interested. So maybe it's the community members, people out there who are very interested in learning about your project, but who are not then necessarily that influential. So again, you might want to think about prioritizing them in a different way than those who have more influence. Next slide. The next component of an effective communication plan is thinking about the goals for communicating with each type of audience. So what exactly are you trying, why are you interested in communicating with different audiences? Are you trying to convince people of something? Is it to keep the project on track? Is it to get their feedback, to keep compliance, to get their buy-in, or to keep them informed? And don't forget, when you're thinking about the goals, that communication can oftentimes and should be a two-way communication. So the goals are not just about why are you trying to communicate with them or transmit information to them, but also what are the goals in getting information from audience members to you. So what is the goal of getting feedback from some of your partners, as an example? Next slide. So once you've thought about different audiences, and once you've thought about the different goals related to each audience, you might want to think about all the different channels that are available to you and how to best match channels with audience members. Again, you might want to think about all the different types of channels first. You might want to list all the kinds of communication channels you might have available to you. So for example, emails, websites, phone conversations, face-to-face meetings. You might want to think about different types of channels. For example, one-way communication, such as a newsletter, sending information out to different audiences, versus multiple-way communication, such as a discussion forum. Once you have that list of different channels, you might want to think about how to best match channels with audiences based on the needs and the goals for each audience. Now, we want to hear from you and just to find out from all of you what are the kinds of channels that you already use. We thought that would be helpful to share with everyone. So we're going to we're going to ask you now to fill out a poll, which will show up on your screen shortly. This poll will show all different kinds of communication channels that we've thought about, that we know of that people are using. And we're going to ask you to check all the ones that you're currently using for internal communication. So there you go. So as you just saw, a window just popped up on your screen, polling. So again, please just go through the list and choose all that apply, and we'll get a sense of what are the different channels being used by all of you. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that, and then we'll share your results. Just a reminder, as we wait for the results, when you think of all the different types of channels that are available to you, you don't have to use them all with all the different types of audiences. So some people might benefit from getting an occasional newsletter, whereas others might benefit from having a face-to-face meeting. So here are the results. It seems that the most popular types of channels that all of you are using are conference calls, face-to-face meetings, emails. So these seem to be all types of personal communication. Some of you also use newsletters, which are one-way communication to send information out to others, surveys, drop boxes. So in general, it seems like we have at least a few of you using all the different kinds of channels. So if you're not using any of them, you might want to jot them down and think about, are any of these channels that you're not using beneficial to you, and how you might best use them in your internal communication. So now, moving on to the next element of a communication plan, frequency. The important thing about frequency is finding that right balance. On one hand, we've all been overwhelmed by emails or phone calls from people or organizations who want our attention. And what oftentimes happens when people try to communicate too often with us is that we tune them out. So obviously, we don't want that happening with your audience members. At the same time, you also don't want to run the risk of having people be left in the dark about important matters related to your project, or not to be aware of what is happening, or for you not to be aware of what's happening within your project because you're not communicating often enough. So it's all about finding that perfect balance. Another thing to keep in mind is that just because you know something very well doesn't mean that others do. So for example, you might have your project's timeline memorized and are very well aware of when all deliverables are due. But that might not be the case with members of your audience, perhaps some of the sites you're working with. So oftentimes repetition is a good thing, and deadlines for deliverables is just one good example of that. You also might want to be thinking about archiving information. So for example, if you send partners e-newsletters once a month, is there a way that they can find those same e-newsletters, for example, on your website, if they're not able to read them through carefully when you first send them? So ways of using archiving as a way to make sure that people always have access to the information when they need it, or when they have the time to access it. And the last piece of advice that we have around frequency is to ask your partners, to ask those you're communicating with for feedback, and to ask frequently people, how's the communication working out for them? Do they feel that you're communicating too often with them? Do they feel that they're not getting information quickly enough? So talking to people and finding and getting input is always helpful. Moving on to the last element of a successful communication plan is the message. So what is it that you're trying to communicate across to audience members, to your different audiences, and what kind of message are you expecting or you're hoping to get from them? And so these are some of the things to be thinking about. What do they want to know? What is it that they want to know? What do you feel that they need to know? What do you need to know from them? And is the message consistent? How to make sure that messages go out consistently? And is it clear? So those are the different kinds of questions to be asking when crafting your message. So now moving on to the next slide. So basically here, what we just presented is the different elements of a communication plan, and this is one template that brings together all those elements together. Now, the important thing about communication plans, though, is to make sure that not only are you developing a strong communication plan in the first place at the beginning of the project, but that these communication plans are often revised in order to make sure that they're constantly relevant, and that they're meeting the needs of the project as the project evolves. So some tips that we have to make sure that that happens is, first of all, to make sure that there's someone in charge of the communication plan. So have someone on your staff, perhaps, not only make sure that the communication plan is implemented, that meetings are happening, that emails are going out, that web forums are open, that people are, in fact, using all the different channels of communication, but also that that person is revising the communication plan as the needs evolve to make sure that the communication plan is a live and fluid tool. Also, the way we present the template here, it looks like each audience has one goal, one channel, one frequency, type of frequency, but you might also want to be thinking about the fact that audiences might have different goals, or you might want to use different channels at different times with the same audience. So you can incorporate that into your plan as well. And lastly, as I just said before, it's also helpful to be revisiting and revising your communication planning, especially with the input of stakeholders, asking people how the communication plan is working for them and making changes accordingly. So that's our initial presentation about developing a communication plan. I'd now like to pause the presentation and give you all a chance to ask any questions. As Rebbe said, what we'd like you to do is to use the chat box. There's a chat box and there's a Q&A box. Either box will work. We'll give you a moment to ask questions. Rebbe and I will ask them out loud, and then we'll provide the answer.
And thanks, Shai. This is Rebbe. I just wanted to let you all know, too, that in the resources section of the communications community of practice, we have posted a template that has the sample brainstorm, a way to sort of organize your brainstorm about your stakeholders, a matrix for prioritizing your stakeholders, and then a sample communication plan that's, it's just one model, but it is a good starting point for doing some communications planning. So we'll pause for a moment and see if we've got any questions on this high-level view. Excellent.
Okay, there doesn't seem to be any questions right now, so we'll move right along. I now have the honor to present Judy Seeler, who will talk to us about the communication, their communication plan for the Taking Stock in Children project.
Thank you, Shai. Sorry, I always want to say Shai. I apologize for that. I really appreciate the opportunity today, and just to give you a little background of Take Stock in Children. The next slide would just show you a little bit of the highlights of our program. And we are a statewide nonprofit that provides volunteer mentors, college success coaches, and scholarships to low-income students throughout the state of Florida. Right now, we currently serve over 8,000 students in 54 counties, so we're relatively statewide. And we really have been developed since about 17 years ago into a very strong public-private partnership model. And my comments today will kind of reflect that. And just to give you a little bit overview for our I3 project, it's called FLIGHT, and it's focusing on the use of data, a new college readiness and retention advocacy model, and our scientific evaluation. So that just gives you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing on a day-to-day level. The next slide, basically, I'm going to give you some very specific examples on how our strategies and tools and how we use them and to communicate both internally and externally. And our key strategy for internal communication is to use, obviously, very effective communication strategies. We really believe that the better we communicate, the better we perform as a team, especially since we are geographically separated, which I assume some of you participating today have the same challenges. Building on the points that were made previously, we find that these strategies have been critical to keep everyone on the same page, provide consistency of messaging, and promoting transparency. So our internal communications plan, basically what we do is twice a month we have calls with our management team in the I3 counties. So there are actually 3 programs with 5 counties. And we find that that's extremely valuable to work on just day-to-day operational, any kind of critical issues and sometimes obviously there's nothing going on, but it does, it establishes that opportunity to really communicate at least on a twice-monthly basis. Twice a year, we conduct I3 staff meetings with our support team, and what that means is we call them task force meetings. We bring our entire I3 staff from all 3 programs together with our technical advisor and our evaluator. And this gives us a chance to really get into just kind of how our programs are working, what are the sharing best practices, which is always important, making sure that we're consistently delivering the same services, so the standardization is huge, and also doing a little reflective practice on what's working, what might not be working, as well as we hoped, and what can we do to tweak the way that we're doing things. So it's been, and also since this is now into our 3rd year, it has been very important just from a camaraderie and, again, being able to feel comfortable picking up the phone and talking to one another so they don't feel that they're operating in a vacuum. Both my regional manager and myself, we do site visits throughout the year, so we'll actually go to our local programs and visit with them and some of their key stakeholders. This has been, again, very productive. It gives us a more personal touch to our goals and gives us a time to meet with them in their own environment, maybe do some site visits and things like that, just to build that camaraderie and that trust as we facilitate this very large project. Our regional manager basically facilitates and coordinates project operations. I, as a project director, work a little bit more on the higher level requirements and projects that are embedded in our grant. So we found that this has been a great strategy and has been working extremely well for the last 3 years. One of the really neat things that we've done that we really like and just kind of threw it out there as an idea that's just been terrific and well received is we decided to do yearly key stakeholders meetings. So in each one of our counties, we asked our counties in our I3 group to invite to a luncheon, breakfast, or whatever, to their key stakeholders, including like their superintendent, any of their school board members, any of their major funders or corporate business partners or mentors, anyone that they feel that would, if they heard this message of what we're doing with I3 and the successes, which we've had some great success, that it would keep them very much involved in the process, keep it out in front of them so that they didn't sign a MOU and say, okay, well, I haven't heard about this for 3 years. So we do that after our results are published through the APR every year, and we go to each individual program location. So it has been extremely effective. It has actually helped our programs as far as their workings with the school districts and colleges to keep that partnership very viable. some of the resources that we use, the flight video, we created an actual video. It's a very short 4-minute video. It was highlighting a lot of our college readiness resources and tools that we've created, such as virtual college tours, mentor toolkits, college survival guides. And what it did is it just, video speaks thousands and volumes of words. So it really has been impactful, so we can show that to any group that we're talking about I3, and just kind of some of the, not only the successes, but also some of the tools and resources we've created. We have a one-page communication on I3 results. Really like to keep this high level and, again, very impactful. Shai, you'll go to the next slide. It gives you just a little bit of a view of kind of what we did with that. It's just it's on hardstock, split kind of presentation on the finish on the paper, and it just goes through the highlights of what we're doing and some of the program accomplishments. And this has been invaluable to hand out to our local programs that are working with us, but also as we talk about our external partners here in a little bit. It's been extremely helpful. And of course, we can never ignore the fact that we have students, graduate students, students that have just graduated high school, started college, and their stories are the most impactful. So whenever we can, we take a student with us, or we, especially our key stakeholders meetings, we'll present a student that has received the services of I3. And as all of you probably know, that the most those student testimonials or those recipient testimonials are so powerful. So it's been very, very exciting. So then the next slide talks about our external communications. Our first 3 strategies really focus on our state and local key stakeholders. Keeping them informed promotes visibility and awareness of our successes and impact in state and local communications. Our local communities, I'm sorry. Our message is really high level, but and it's really targeted to their constituencies. So we do yearly visits to congressional members on Capitol Hill that actually are involved in the I3 project. They were extremely supportive and helpful during the grant process. And so now we just take the time when we're in DC to bring them just a very concise information packet, and we attempt to meet with the legislator or the education aide. And so far we've done pretty well in being able to meet with the legislator, but on occasion when they're in committee and things, that we meet with their education aide, or that one of their other aides that are in the office, and that's been very impactful also. Our state legislature is also extremely important because, as I talked about earlier, the public-private foundation, public-private partnership, all of our scholarship dollars are privately raised, and the public money comes from the legislature. So it's very important to keep them informed. We bring student and graduates of the program to the Capitol. We also make sure that our Vice President of Strategic Affairs tracks our legislative funding initiative through the session. So she is there pretty much in Tallahassee during session to continue to keep track of where we are with our funding requests. We do make a concerted effort to have our legislators understand the program outcomes. And this year we used the I3 College Readiness outcomes that you saw on the handout. And we actually received an additional $1.2 million for those in recognition of and validation of the results. As far as we have a leadership conference in Tallahassee, and that allows us to bring in all of our local programs throughout the state, which we continue the advocacy with local programs being encouraged to meet with their own legislators to share their outcomes and their stories and their student stories. We also take this time too, because we're in Tallahassee, to invite our Commissioner of Education, our chancellors of our state, university, and our college systems, any of the mayors that would like to attend with their local programs, to the governor's office. So again, we're reaching out to all of our key stakeholders, people that in the political arena that really do promote Take Stock in Children. And it's, again, important to keep us constantly out in front of them and having them understand the successes, again, that we have developed and are continuing. We also do yearly visits to our match partners. I find that this is extremely important. I think the in-person visits create a wonderful opportunity to personalize our message. It also helps us establish important and personal relationships with them, which have a tendency to create more viable partnerships. And we do actually invite them to our conference so that, you know, they're not just us on the side hearing of all the successes. They can actually see the program, see the successes with the students, and really participate. So we found those extremely valuable. Our participation presentations for project-related external conferences, the Mentor Summit we participated in, the IMA, which is in the National Mentor Association conference. We've actually not only attended, but actually presented a workshop. And this just helps create awareness of the program in arenas where our Take Stock is really not that well known. So again, visibility is incredibly important. So our team really includes our CEO, our Vice President of Strategic Affairs, all of our I3, myself included, our regional directors of our state. It's a very, very good team, and it certainly gives us an opportunity to make sure that we are communicating all the way across the state and not just in one specific area. So, Shai, I think that's all I have for right now, so I'll turn it back to you.
Hey, Judy, this is Reddy Carey, and I have a question for you. Do you have a dedicated communications team, or is there someone in charge of this network of ways to reach people, or can you talk a little bit about your internal structure?
Sure. Well, as far as internally for our I3 counties, that's driven by myself and our regional director. So that is from our internal I3 project. But our external is really our Vice President of Strategic Affairs is the one that actually is in charge of our communication strategies and planning. And, you know, obviously, as most nonprofits, we don't have a very large staff, so everyone shares in those duties. But it's our Vice President of Strategic Partnerships that really is the one that's organizing and developing these communication plans.
Thank you. And I just had another question. It seems in your internal communications that you were describing, it seems as though it was sort of the way you talked about the different meetings and vehicles you have for communicating with people. It seemed like it was a combination of sort of ensuring fidelity of implementation across the sites, as well as getting buy-in for continued participation. And I'm wondering if I'm reading that correctly, if those are sort of the goals of those different vehicles you use, or if it's, you know, has been changing over time?
No, I think that was our initial intent. We are separated geographically, and each lead partner that houses the Take Stock is an individual entity, so we're more of like a franchise. So the fidelity was extremely important, considering we're under a scientific evaluation. So that was huge. And and really it is. It's a matter of, you know, making sure that, you know, we are keeping ourselves out in front, that we keep people informed, and that they are witnessing our success, and to, you know, not find that it's because our partnership had to be with a school district in Florida countywide. School districts are countywide. So keeping those key stakeholders informed continually, keeps their support if we have any particular issues, and out to the forefront, and I think that's extremely important.
Thanks. We have a question from someone, one of our participants, who was wondering if FLIGHT is a validation, scale-up, or development project, and what year you're in. I think you say third year?
Yes, we are a development project, and we're in our third year. We actually had we were to be done third year, but we did get a fourth year no-cost extension, so that was good. We have a lot of projects still we're busy with, so we were excited to extend our scientific evaluation.
Great. Just as a reminder to the participants, if you've got a question, post it in that chat, and we will pose it to Judy. Okay, well, Judy, we may circle back around to you, but I think now we're going to move the ball over to Maureen, who's going to talk to us about the Council for Opportunity in Education. Hello, Maureen.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation, and I'm certainly delighted to participate. The Gaining Options for College Collaborative, or Go College, is the I3 project of the Council for Opportunity in Education. And COE represents about 2,600 college access and success programs that operate across the country. And so our initiative, our Go College initiative, is taking what was happening in many of those projects and through a pilot that was supported by the General Electric Foundation, making those services more intensive in schools with very high concentrations of low-income students. And so in Go College, we have arrived at the very beginning of the project in its implementation stage, as you can see in the next slide, 6 cornerstones of how the project is operating. And they include collaboration among many community partners, using data to improve student outcomes, combining a whole school approach with a more intensive approach for smaller learning communities. We use these cornerstones in all of our publications. Most of the sessions that we do explaining the project, we revisit them at many meetings. So we try to use the same language as often as we can in the project so that we're all on the same page. So if you go to the next slide, Go College is a validation grant. It's a 5-year grant. We're in the end of the 3rd year of that grant. And very quickly, I think regardless of the size or the length of your grant, you realize that it's a very, very short period, and that communication from the beginning, or at least from a few months into the beginning, has to be constantly thought about in terms of what happens when the I3 funding is over. It's easy to get caught in because of the importance of the work, because of the importance of I3 in the present, but I would emphasize that the communication plan really has to have a long-range vision of what you're trying to communicate. And that applies to all of the things that we looked at the beginning of this webinar, your goals, your audiences, all those things are impacted by the kind of post-I3 realization. At COE, we spread communication tasks among units depending on the audience. It is coordinated, most communications, by our Vice President for Public Policy and Communications, and that's proved to be really important so that we can take advantage of all the aspects of the organization in communicating about I3. We also believe that the connection between the message and the audience is key, and understanding who the audiences are, whether that's a college, whether it's a business, whether it's a faith community, whether it's a funder. And that just because one of your staff or one of the partners has expertise with one audience and can communicate successfully with one audience doesn't guarantee that they have any expertise or will be successful in communicating with another audience. So there are differences, and it's important to understand them in the beginning. If you go to the next slide, Go College is operating in 6 high schools in 2 districts, Louisville, Kentucky, or Jefferson County, Kentucky, which is the 13th largest school district in the country, and Erie, Pennsylvania, which is the 3rd largest school district in Pennsylvania, but is about an eighth of the size of Jefferson County. But despite the differences in size, the politics of each of the sites is very complex. There's politics in relationship to the state as it relates to the school district. There's politics within the school district. There's politics within, and politics, I don't mean it in a negative fashion. I mean there's human things happening between groups in each of these places. And as you communicate, if you're unaware of those human dimensions of the relationships, your communication can be off track. Oftentimes when we talk about communication, we talk mainly about what we're saying, but it's critical that we spend as much time listening as we spend talking. The listening part of communication is, in my view, fairly undervalued. And if we actually do understand what's going on and hear what people are saying, our communications will be tighter. I also want to stress that cultural competence in communications is very critical. And this is kind of one of those words, cultural competence, that we throw around. And we use it most often to reflect the fact that among different racial or economic groups, different language, different ways of saying things, different messengers of messages are received differently. And if you don't, as a project, have cultural competence, you're handicapped in the process. Now, you can use it in terms of, I think the issue of cultural competence it's easy to, or it's not easy, but it's maybe more obvious, especially this week in thinking about cultural competence as it relates to race or ethnicity or different communities in a setting. But there's also cultures that that are smaller than that or different than that. Many people, our partners, our subcontracts are with both community agencies and with colleges. And probably most people in colleges are not culturally competent in schools. And many people that work in high schools don't speak the language of colleges. So as you talk to people and bring people together, this ability to listen and hear and to see where the communication disconnects are occurring is very critical. Go College is a use of data project, so we have to lead with data. We have to, when we speak to partners, when we bring partners together, when we go and talk to people who fund us or people who are supporting us, if we don't have data to share with them, we look like we're fraudulent. So we have to have that data available and be able to use. But at the same time, there's complexity in data, and without people behind it, it often falls flat. So the combination of stories which and the data, which I think Take Stock in Children illustrated very well how you can sometimes combine those things, is very key. COE believes, Go College believes, that our staff have to, or at least one or two of our staff have to spend as much time as possible on the ground with students, with partners, with funders, with possible partners. And all the time we do that, we find that we get leads to possible new partners, and since collaboration is the first of our cornerstones, that ability to listen, to talk with people individually, and to then do what they suggest, you know, not just talk to them, but actually follow up on what they say, has been key for us. If we go to the next slide, just in suggestions in terms of meetings, we try to not talk very much. We try to have our staff, and by that I mean COE staff as opposed to partner staff, do less talking at the meetings and have individuals from the partners, and that typically is the agencies, the schools, and the colleges, lead sections of the meetings where we bring everybody together. That means spending time before those meetings with each of the people that we're having lead those sections, so that what we're hoping to get done in those sections happens, but we found it's much more effective for somebody other than us to be doing the talking. We've also found that getting materials out, school calendars are very full. We want principals and assistant principals to participate, so getting schedules out, getting materials out is really key. We have found that every meeting we have with everybody, we've got to keep and share those minutes, because there's so many things happening so quickly in a project like the I-3. There's so many moving parts that it's easy to drop things if you don't have a good record. We use the evaluators' feedback to not just on the effectiveness of the project, but in terms of formative evaluation of our communications as well. In the next slide, our central staff began meeting once every week and found that we wanted more time to delve into issues, and so we meet less frequently but for longer periods. At the sites, we began with monthly meetings of all the partners. That included the school principals. It included fairly senior people from our participating colleges. At their request, we switched to bi-monthly meetings, but in the interim, we do quite a few individual visits and telephone conferences and webinars and professional development activities. We have twice a year, we have people from each of our partners come together, usually at one of those sites. So we just finished up a joint meeting in Erie, Pennsylvania. We brought our business partners, we brought people from the colleges, we brought people from the state agencies, so that they then could not just meet with us, but also visit their parallel individuals at their own sites. If you go to the next slide, just some suggestions. Brand your projects early. I-3 may be very meaningful to us, but it may not be meaningful in a larger world that we're trying to work in and impact. Make sure that you can speak and describe your project simply, as was said, simply based on audience. Anticipate questions so that your materials answer many of the questions that you have. So you do have written answers to questions that might be useful. As the Take Stock in Children project does effectively, we found that using video is a great way to reach people and touch people. Students are good at making videos. We've been effective in getting media to cover our activities in both of the cities, and interviews with students and interviews with parents, and video of our activities has been a plus in getting media attention. So I think that concludes my section of the webinar, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions people have.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. I had this is Shai, I had one specific question. You mentioned the importance of cultural competence in communication. So I was wondering, do you have specific examples of resources or tools, or just any even anecdotes that you have of ways in which your project has been keeping that in mind or communicating in a culturally competent way?
I think, for example, I think it's a difficult thing to deal with. We have 2 different sites. One site is in Kentucky. It has a very large school district that's spread out. We have minority staff, okay, and if we didn't have minority staff, for example, I don't think we would be able to have involved the African American churches in our project. But our staff actually, not because anybody asked them to do this, has, when they're visiting our sites, has gone down early, gone to local churches, big churches, small churches, in order to meet people and to listen to community concerns. In both communities, I think this issue of intercommunication is people are aware of it and often see our project as being a resource to help people communicate. So we try to actually do that, you know, by bringing people together for lunch, or following up if somebody asks you a question, to ask somebody else a question that might not be comfortable with that, asking the question themselves. So I think the biggest key here is to be aware of it, to be really aware of the fact that multiculturalism, whether it's a plus or a minus in your view, that the fact that people are from different backgrounds and experiences is something that you have to really be aware of, and you really have to try very hard to assemble a staff that can talk broadly to all of your partners and to different audiences in a community.
Thank you so much. I've got another question from someone, a participant, who's asking, do you have a process for figuring out what questions to anticipate in that one slide where you say make sure that you sort of have all the questions answered ahead of time and resources to pull? Do you have a process for anticipating that, and have you run into situations where someone's asked a question that has really knocked the wind out of you, and how have you dealt with that?
But they're always knocking the wind out of us. So I think that it's coming. So I don't think even if you have a process to anticipate everything, I think again it's important to anticipate your evaluators and ask and see what questions they're asking, because they're separate from you yet part of you, and so the questions they ask are oftentimes questions that a lot of people have. I think it's important to have your staff, and by staff I don't mean your central office staff, but your partner, if they have coaches or counselors or parent advisors or professional development specialists, to make sure that the questions you hear from them are questions that you think other people might have as well. I think it's also really important to, if you're working in schools and you're not of the schools, which we as I said, our programs are historically college or agency based, to be very to try to get the schools to ask the questions. There's a great sense in many of our, and we're in high schools, we're not in elementary schools. They're under pressure from a lot of different places to change and to meet the changes. So oftentimes the mode of accommodating that is to keep quiet and not to not stand in the way of something happening, but not to facilitate it by saying, hey, by asking questions. So I think particularly if you're outside the schools and need participation of the schools, you really have to seek it out, seek the questions so that you then, because a question in one school probably exists in many more of them.
Great point. Last call to the participants to post a question in the chat for either Judy or Maureen. We'll wait for a couple of minutes or a couple of tens of seconds. I want to make sure that we end on time for you all. Please keep in mind that we will have the open phone session on the 25th. Judy and Maureen can't be on it, but we can forward any questions that you have for them specifically, and we can get answers for you if something comes to you in the middle of the night tonight that you are dying to know the answer to. Nate, could I have the next slide? So I just want to thank Judy and Maureen so much for sharing your strategies and ideas with us. It's obvious that you take great care in this, that it's very important to you, that you have you put a lot of thought and maintenance into your communication planning, and it will be great to share some of these resources in the Community of Practice website. And just in summary, Shai and I pulled together some of these rules in consultation with Judy and Maureen, and also from your TA needs assessment conversations earlier on. But a couple of things I want to highlight here. And I think Maureen talked about this really beautifully, about making sure to do some pulse checks to make sure that meetings that you're, or vehicles that you're planning, meetings that you're having are still relevant and necessary and the right length. And I think people are afraid of ending standing meetings sometimes, but there's nothing more exhilarating than getting a meeting off your plate sometimes, or adding a different one, a different kind of meeting. So, especially, or adding new channels. So be flexible, be nimble with your communication planning, and revisit it as the project progresses and as new phases happen. I think you want to remember also that you want to cultivate both information gathering and pushing. I think sometimes as project leads, we feel as though it's a lot of shoving information out at people so that they can do what we need them to do for the project. But again, Maureen and Judy both talked about making it available and opportunities for people to give you feedback and share and become, build the relationships that are necessary to create these projects successfully. And finally, having this, a role, somebody who feels responsible and accountable for creating communication channels is very important. And as Maureen said, it may not be the same person that's the author for all of these things. Some people may be excellent at speaking to legislators, but not so great with speaking to parents, and vice versa. So be mindful that while it's very helpful to have a central person in charge of the communication strategy and plan, the audiences and the leaders and the facilitators can be distributed and take advantage of building buy-in by having other people take the lead sometimes. You don't have to plan every agenda, you don't have to lead every presentation. So that is what I would like to close with. And we'd love to add to these sort of rules of thumb. We'll add, Maureen, your summary suggestions as well. And if others have thoughts of things we can add to sort of the good practice in communication planning, we'd love to hear about them. There's three things I just want to remind you of. Number one, we're going to have a link to the evaluation survey in the chat room, and we'd love for you all to please fill that out. Remember the open phone session on July 25th at 2 o'clock. And I just put a link in the chat room to the Communications Community of Practice, and specifically to the resources page where the template that I talked about is in there for creating a communication plan, and also a lot of other good resources that have been submitted by our TA liaisons and experts and all of you all. So we're so grateful that you joined us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you.